In this episode, we're going to show you the art of blocking, presented by Intel Officer Luke.
This is the captain. Brace for impact.
So the first half of this video is going to be about defensive blocking. So Ken showed this a little bit in the Nebulon B video, but basically defensive blocking is all about keeping your opponent's close range brawlers at arm's length. You're trying to protect your really vulnerable ships that just can't stand up to that kind of pounding. So the way defensive blocking works is you're literally using cheaper, less important ships, and it's almost always flotillas, to physically keep your opponent's ships away from your more important ones. In this case, I'm using my GR75s to keep them away from my Yavaris. So a lot of a successful block in Armada is really set up in deployment. So in this scenario, we've presumed that because of my fleet is based around squadrons, that I've had more deployments because of those squadrons, and as a result, I was able to set up a successful block by putting both of my flotillas on the right side. To fully explain, the key part of a defensive block is you want to keep your blockers about a ship's distance away from the ship that they're protecting. Basically, what you want to create is a literal wall with your ship that prevents close range ships from getting that distance. They just can't move in. Now, generally, you're never going to get the ideal scenario like we showed in the first slide where you had two ships blocking the other one. So a lot of the time you're going to have to set up your blockers just sort of hoping that they'll work. And so normally you can do this by putting one on each side. It's not as effective because obviously you have less ships covering less space, but it can still prove the difference. In this case, even though I only have the one ship, it should be able to block the GR75 from getting most of my side arc. Obviously, if they have a navigate and so on, they could be able to get in through the front, but it'll be a lot harder angle of approach, and hopefully that'll be enough. Often that's the key with a defensive block. You're just trying to keep that important ship alive and make the approach for those real close range brawlers like your MiG-30s, your Hammerheads, your Raiders and your Demolishers harder. You just want to make their life difficult and sort of funnel them into worse attack vectors. So the other thing you can do to help a defensive block, especially sort of an incomplete block or a partial block just using one ship, is you can use squadrons to fill the gaps. This is really especially effective with the archetypal defensive blocker, which is Yavaris. Here, even though Demolisher could get into my back, if it does, I probably can tank the one side arc, barring some really obscene dice, but with the double brace it should be fine. And if he does, he's going to cop, two B-wings getting Yavaris, which should really mess him up. So again, by doing this, I'm just making him giving him more incentive to come into my better front arc, where I can put more shots on him and have a better chance of surviving, hopefully. And really, again, this is the key for defensive blocking. You're just trying to create a situation where it's hard for your opponent to do what they want to do. You're trying to frustrate their plans and keep your ship alive. So a really good way to think about defensive blocking is, for all you sports fans out there, is it's a lot like a fend for Australians or the stiff arm for Americans. You're literally just trying to keep them at arm's length with your hands, which are your cheaper ships, to try and protect your body. So, defensive fleet, stiff arm them, and you should be all right. So defensive blocking is also a really good way to formation fly in general, because although it's primarily used to keep your ship safe from your close range brawlers, it does really help against those sort of plinking long range shots by obstructing basically the primary target. In this case, by having the two GR75s protecting the weak flank of the Nebulon, it's really keeping it safe from an enemy's TRC-90. In this case, at long range, it completely negates its side arc, forcing it to shoot at the GR75, and out of its front arc, it's reduced to only one red dice, which is a lot more manageable. This is again really important for weak, vulnerable ships, or those without evades, as TRC-90s, as we all know, are just really, really good at sort of that death by 1,000 cuts. So again, defensive blocking, it's just a really good way to formation fly if you're just trying to keep something alive. So obviously some of you might be wondering, why do you want to offensive block? The main reason is because by limiting your opponent's movement, you're dictating the terms of the battle. Generally, when you're pulling off a block, you're ruining your opponent's plan. For ships like MiG-80s, assault frigates, and other side arcers, blocking them, preventing them from moving, is just the worst thing that can happen for them. Their ideal scenario for a side archer is just to constantly circle you, preferably from the edge of the board, and just keep you at arm's length and just shoot happily out of that big fat side arc. By offensive blocking, you're preventing this from happening. You're stopping them from moving, and you're allowing your offensive weapons to get in close and negate their advantage, and preferably to destroy them and win you the game. The key to an offensive block is basically shove something down its throat. So in this case, we want this radar to end up about here, and then by doing this, we're making it impossible, even with speed 2, for the MiG-80 to clear it. So it's just going to have to ram. Now, eventually, obviously, if we were to stay in this position, just because of the bigger ship's health and hull and, its ability to redirect, it's going to kill it. But we don't really need the Raider to survive, although it is good if it does. What we want to do is just hold the MiG-80 in place for a turn or two and allow our other ships that are often coming from worse positions, like in this case a Demolisher, time to come in and just blow the MiG-80 away, to kill the target ship. As most of you will kind of work out, it's pretty basic hammer and anvil technique. Your blocker is your anvil where you're holding the enemy, and then your hammer is whatever offensive weapon you're bringing in to finish the job. Now, although we don't often think about it, one of the best blockers is the ISD. It wants to be right in front of its target because it's going to win that fight. It's its own hammer and anvil in one. You put the ISD in front of something and block its movement, invariably it will kill it unless it's a better upgraded ISD or the target has heavy support from elsewhere on the board. So really, when you're flying an ISD, you want to try and sit in the front arc of your opponent. Now, one of the more cheeky ways to pull off an offensive block as an Imperial is to use a Gozanti with ECM and Minister Tua. Obviously, you need Minister Tua to buy ECM. It's not used often, but it is one of the best blockers in the game, purely because unless you can get multiple shots on it, it is actually unkillable. This is, of course, because it has a scatter and it has ECMs, so basically it just has unlock scatter when you need it. As a result, you can use it to, in fact, block other ISDs, because what are they going to do? You're just going to scatter it. Now, for the Rebels, one of the best offensive blocks, especially for, as we said, the lethal front arc of an ISD, which you don't see as often now because of the FAQ nerf, was the Riken zombie block. In particular, if you could accept the loss, sticking a Corvette in the front arc of whatever you were trying to block. This is obviously because Riken just allows you to die and keep on trucking. It's a bit harder to pull off nowadays, post-nerf, because you might have other things on the board that you want to keep alive, but it is still a very, very viable tactic. Sure, you're going to lose that 40-point, 50-point CR90, but if you can trade up for that, 130, 180 potentially, big ship, it really, really does pay off. So obviously the key for this is just have General Riken as your admiral, as a rebel, and have a ship you can stick in the front arc. CR90s in particular are really good because they can lay out a real amount of pain before they go down, but GR75s are just as good. Now, the third and final form of blocking that kind of actually slipped our minds at first is what we call the speed bump. And this is where you block yourself. Now, this might sound really terrible and like, well, I'll just fly better and I won't have to do it. But often, things can get away from you, or you need to be doing other commands, and you find yourself in a situation where you need to slow down and you have no way of doing it. A really, really effective way to do it is to use your own ships to stop you. So for example, in this situation, this ISD is at speed 3, it has a squadron command, it's going to fly off the board, but we've stuck a little Gozanti in front of it, we've flown it in from the side, and we're using it as a speed bump. We'll hit this, and therefore we won't die. And that's in essence what you're doing with a speed bump. you're using your own ship to keep your other ship in place where it is currently for an advantageous purpose. Now, often this is because you're trying to keep yourself from flying off the board, but there are other reasons to do so. So another example of when a speed bump is a really good tactic to use is when your ship is in a really good spot and you don't want to leave it yet. So in this above example, our Avenger ISD has double arc on the enemy's Liberty, but if we were just to play without the speed bump, sure, we'd get our double shots, and potentially if we rolled really well, or if we had, boarding troopers potentially, we would be able to just blow it up in the one hit and it'd be fine. But if we don't do this, if we don't have anything in front of us, we really run the risk of just flying past like 2 ships in the night and not finishing the kill. Now, if you know that potential is there, what you can do is you can create a speed bump to keep your ship where it is. And the result is that you get that really beneficial firing pattern for more than one turn. We hit them with the double arc, we go to move, we hit our own ship, and we stay where we are. As a result, getting the second shot again and blowing up the Liberty. Equally, we can use the speed bump to help protect our ships from flying into a terrible situation. So, in the reverse of the above, here we have an ISD bearing down on us, and currently we are at long range, which we know we can kind of tank pretty reliably. But if we were to move into medium range or closer, we'd be really running the risk of getting destroyed. Now, this GR75 has already activated, or maybe not, but even if it does blow up, it's an acceptable loss. As a result, we can afford to use it as a speed bump to keep us at long range of the ISD. This is a tactic that a lot of good players really use to great effect to make up for misplays or for their opponent's good flying. They use their own ships, generally they're less expensive, more expendable ones, to block their better ships and therefore prevent their enemy's plans from going into effect. So that's it for this video. Hopefully it should have given you the basics of the art of blocking, both defensively, offensively, and neutral speed bumps. We hope this really helps you. Good luck at your regionals, guys. If you liked what we've done, give us some suggestions for sort of general tactics you'd like to see, or specific ships you'd like to see Captain Clinics done on. And of course, check out our Patreon at Master of the Fleet, as we're really trying to ramp up to get that Scarif Gate for our Nerf Herding series. Anyway, this is Intel Officer Luke signing off for Master of the Fleet. Good luck, guys.